was leased on with a carrier that really didn't have a lot of support for owner operators, and it wasn't like they could take the load off me and keep it moving. It was my trailer. They couldn't take my trailer off my hands because it was my unit. Because getting it back to me would have been a mess. So it was just a waiting game, trying to get in the shop and then going from there. And while I was sitting in that hotel room, kind of moping around, trying to figure out what I was going to do, it occurred to me that the whole situation was all on my shoulders. So after all that, when I had some time to sit and think about it a little bit more, I realized, okay, there's really no point being a lease agreement owner-operator anymore. All of this is going to be on my shoulders no matter what. It's going to be my bill for any trailer issue or truck issue, so I might as well have my own authority. So 6 months later, I had my own operating authority, became my own carrier. And then, now it's 2.5 years essentially after that, a little more than 2.5 years, and I'm finally taking the steps to reacquaint myself with the Western states, because it's not the fault of the states themselves that all of that came together. It just happened to be a coincidence of location. But again, I just did not feel a desire to come back out this way. But this sounds like, no, it's time to branch out a little bit here. And honestly, it's been a good trip in that regard, because it's been kind of cathartic to be out this way again. Also, I held off. The most logical reason I held off on coming west is because I don't have super single-sized tire chains. And Colorado has a tire chain law, along with, I think, Montana and Wyoming also have chain laws to some degree. I forget the ins and outs off the top of my head. But I know Colorado has a chain law. From September to May, you've got to have tire chains on board, and they have signs reminding you of that. And if you don't have those chains, if they stop you, you're asking for some trouble. And I really didn't want to invest in super single-sized tire chains because I didn't expect that I was going to be staying with super single tires for this truck. And lo and behold, about a month ago, give or take, 3-4 weeks ago, well, about 3 weeks ago, I converted from super single to standard single. So I saved myself a bunch of money not buying tire chains. And also, this trip was worth it to sort of put this truck to the test of how well could it operate out west. And obviously, it's a very silly test to put a truck through when it was designed to basically function in all 48 states plus Mexico and Canada. So, it's partly grounded in irrationality, and sometimes you just got to dip your toes into certain things rather than just diving in head first. And that's how I approached it. But anyway, it's been wonderful to see Colorado again. I haven't been out here in years. I wish the freight market was healthier, but it is nice to have kind of gotten over myself and gotten through the issues that have kept me away from the Western states, and also now that having standard single tires, I feel a lot more comfortable and confident bringing this truck out this way if I decide to run out here in the colder months, which probably is not going to happen if I'm being honest, because I'm not really a fan of operating in these states in wintertime. It can get awfully cold, and occasionally the snow can be rather tempestuous, and there's a habit of roads suddenly becoming closed when storms are a-brewing. So I've been stuck in areas with closed roads before, and it's not fun, and I really don't care to repeat that process again. So it's going to be a little bit before I operate out this way in the cold, but summertime's all right. Anyway, YouTube, thank you so much for watching. I really do appreciate it, and I hope you have a good rest of your day. And as always, I will see you down the road.